I think we often forget about the small town. But these places have incredible people and stories and histories as well. I wanted to document these places, help them tell their stories. To do this, I traveled to a nearby town of 1,000 people in central Alaska known as Salcha. Enjoy these interviews, these memories, these stories from Salcha.
Well, our names are Dick and Cade Johnson, and we're retired. Richard was electronics technician for the FAA when he retired, and I was housewife with various odd jobs.
We are not spiritual.
Well, not in the sense that most people think. I mean, we don't attend a church. We're not a member of any religious group, but to us, the whole outdoors, our beautiful wilderness and everything else, I mean, that's, to me, that's God's country. That's our thing. And we find peace in just being out in the beautiful world. And we live, you help your neighbors, you do unto others as you want them to do unto you. And that's just been our whole life that way. And we continue to do so even today, as much as we can. How long have we lived in Salcha? 40 years this past July. How did we remember the town when we came here? Well, it really hasn't changed much. The Salcha store existed. The Salcha River Lodge was there, and a couple of bars. I think every place always has a bar. And it hasn't changed a whole lot in that respect. There's fewer of the really old people are still around. A lot of them have been dying off the last few years, just like us. We're all reaching the top of the heap, and soon we'll be gone, but who knows, The town itself was not, we weren't involved with the town. We were way upriver, 30 miles off the highway. And so we knew a lot of people, but not real close. More young people are moving in, which is nice to see. Just, like the family coming back to the Salcha store, things like this. This is good to see, the young people coming back and making home here. And there's a lot more traffic than there ever used to be. The traffic is getting atrocious on the highway. But it's just, I don't know. Now the river where we lived, it's changed a lot, but then again, it's the younger generation coming in. The older generation is not able to do like they used to, or they've all died. And so now we have a younger group in with their children, and it just moves, in the regular life cycles, which is nice.
And that's why we're here. I could no longer get firewood. Got too old and weak.
Oh, because of his heart problems.
Yep.
And
more than anything.
Heart and lungs, and so he is not able to do a lot of things today.
What are the people here like? How would you describe this community compared to, even Fairbanks?
Very independent. I would say most of the people out here, they like their space. They like their peace. They want to do things their own way. They don't like regulations as much. I mean, they don't want to be told what to do and how to do it and when to do it. And we're number one in that category because we've lived that way our whole life. And we've not lived in a town or a city in, 57 years. So,
of which we've had solar power for the last, 56?
50.
We didn't have it at first.
No, we've been living off the grid for 57 years. We just celebrated our 58th anniversary in July, the end of July. And so our first year we lived in the city, in Los Angeles area, for 1 year when we said, no, we don't want to raise a family here. And he loved going hunting and fishing in this place in the Sierras, and so that's why we bought land and moved. And it wasn't a town. It wasn't even as like Salcha. didn't have that many businesses. There was a
Didn't
bar
have that many people.
and a store, a little general store. And there wasn't that many people. When we moved up there, there was 3 families, and we lived about 15 miles apart. So, I mean, it wasn't like we were close neighbors, but we were the only people on the mountain, so it was, we were still friends and neighbors. As we lived there, we did like most people do. You try to make the little community grow and things. And we started a volunteer fire department, and we got things going actually too well, because we lived there and we worked down in the desert, because that was the nearest town, 50 miles away. And we used to drive back and forth, and then we decided we'd learn to fly, and we bought an airplane, an old Cessna 170, and we flew back and forth and flew our kids to school. And that worked out good for us, but we showed other people that you could live out and still work in town. So we kind of bit off our nose to spite our face, to say, because people started moving up on the mountain, and then it started getting crowded, and it was no longer our little peaceful wilderness. They wanted paved roads, and they wanted telephones, and they wanted all this stuff, and we're like, no. If you wanted that, you should have stayed in town. So when we came up here, we fit in Alaska, is what we thought. Our family, even our boys, said the same thing. We fit in here. In California, we were weirdos. Who lives out in the middle of nowhere and flies their kids to school every day in California?
Just tell us about it.
How did I get into flying? I'll tell you how I got into flying. We were sitting at a hot springs, and all of a sudden this guy flew in a Cessna 170, an older one. And we thought, boy, that looks like fun. So he took us flying. And my wife, when we went home, she says, we ought to get a pilot's license. So we did. I was working on a Naval Weapons Center down in California. I could go on the Naval Weapons Center and fly out of there for the license. She couldn't do that. So she took her flying lessons from a place in Inyokern, California, which was about, 10 miles from
where you were.
The base, yeah.
We were the first husband and wife team to get licensed together on the same day.
Now here's the bad news, see. She got hers before me. Never thought it would bother me. The male ego, you just don't believe it until it happens to you. She called me up and she says, I got my license.
I'm a bona fide pilot and everything.
Then I had to take the test. Boy, I thought, if I fail, I'm in trouble.
It worked good.
Yeah, that's the
it
way
worked
happened.
good.
Then as soon as we got our pilot's license, we went down to San Diego and bought an airplane. A Cessna 170. And we had that for, 26 years, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Then we built the plane. And my advice to people is, buy one that's manufactured. It wasn't bad building the airplane, but it's not as good as a manufactured airplane.
Once we got the airplane, we stopped driving back and forth to work. We started flying. And then, of course, our kids, we flew them to school because I worked for the school district, too. So all of us commuted every day by airplane and back and forth. And then we came to Alaska, and of course, up here, an airplane is like an automobile. It opened the whole world to us. And in the winter, we put skis on, and so we can fly anywhere in the winter and land. It was just great. But you got to be careful of river ice, because sometimes you hit rotten spots and you'll get a ski through the ice, and that cannot be too nice. Well, in 1977, we took our boys and our backpacks, and we took a trip to Alaska in our 170 airplane, and we spent the whole 2.5 months of summer touring the state. And when we finished our tour of the state, all over from Barrow to up and down southeast, everywhere, we went home, and our boys said, we loved Alaska. We should move up there and build ourselves a log home. And we laughed, and we thought about it, and that's what we did. We sold everything. We lived in the High Sierras in California, and we sold everything, moved up here in June of 1979. We arrived here the end of June, but we didn't get the property right away. We were camped in a tent in downtown Fairbanks at Norlight Campground until we closed on the property up the river. We moved upriver because when we came here, we sent letters to 21 real estate offices in Fairbanks and asked about property that had water, trees, hills. We had those specifications. If it didn't have water, trees, and hills nearby, we didn't want it. We wanted to have those things. And we had, from the 21 realtors, 2 answered. And of the 2, one was a lot more explicit and went into more detail on what was available. So when we arrived up here, the end of June of 1979, we went to that real estate office on 2nd Avenue in Fairbanks, and the lady who had sent us answers said, my husband and I have found 3 parcels up the Salcha River you might be interested in. We had no idea where the Salcha River was. And she said, I'll pack a picnic lunch and my husband will take you up the river tomorrow if you're willing. And we got all excited, like, oh yeah, trip up a river, this sounds cool. I mean, whether we buy property or not, it sounded like a cool day. So off we went, and we looked at the 3 pieces of property, and our boys and the 2 of us all agreed on one of the parcels because it was located with a big gravel bar right across the river, which would be a good runway. So we could land our plane right there and we'd be set. The only problem is we had 2 teenage boys. They don't grow very small. Teenage boys kind of get bigger and taller and need more space. And this little piece of land had a 16 by 16 foot unfinished log cabin. And we thought that's going to be mighty crowded come winter. So maybe we need to hurry up and settle and start adding on to it. And basically, that's what we did. Mr. and Mrs. Don and Alice Hulsheiser, were the ones that introduced us to the Salcha River, showed us some properties, and that's how we wound up there. Because we had to be within a certain distance of Fairbanks. We knew we had to work for a living because we still were raising a family. And that's about it.
So we flew back and forth to work.
Our flying cutoff was 30 below zero. If it was colder than 30 below zero, we didn't try to fly because it was too hard on the equipment. And we would use a snow machine to get to the highway and then our car to drive into town. To get materials and things to the cabin, everything has to be freighted, either by boat or by snow machine with sleds, depending on the time of year. And even your groceries and things. Everything was freighted and packed in. And it was easiest by snow machine with sleds because you can drive the sled right up to the door and offload. The boat, first you have to load everything into the boat, and then you've got to get the boat there, and then you have to offload it from the boat and get it to the cabin. Because, our cabin wasn't sitting right on the edge of the river. It was back into the woods a little bit. And that made more work. When we were building, at first, after we moved up to Salcha, when we were building, we made our own lumber.
Yep.
We used a chainsaw. We bought an attachment from Sears for the chainsaw that we could attach to the bar and everything, and we made our lumber and stacked it out to dry. And that was interesting. We had 2 huge stacks of lumber. We were getting ready to build a shop, and we had these 2 big stacks of lumber. We'd been all winter making lumber and had it spaced to dry, stacked up. The water came up and floated these stacks off into the woods and never even unloaded the lumber. It split the piles into 2 and moved the piles through the trees in the woods, floated them. And when the water receded, here's these stacks of lumber sitting 50 to 75 foot out in the woods away from where we had left it. And it was like, wow, the force of nature. And didn't even mess up the wood. I mean,
You would have thought
all
it
the
would have
spacers.
broken it all up. It didn't. There was a pile here, perfectly stacked, just like we had stacked it, and it was all in one pile when it left where it was. We flew back and forth from Fairbanks to Southern California about 20 times.
Oh, at
round
least,
trip.
at least.
Yeah, at least.
And across the United States and Canada.
Yeah.
Most of the time, our flights were good. Occasionally we had problems, you know. I mean, you can't, when you're flying, it's just like when you're driving, you get into storms. I think my favorite one was when I actually flew the plane myself,
Yeah.
alone, down to Southern California from Fairbanks, and camping under the wing and everything. And of course I ran into some stormy weather and snowstorms and what have you, but I met up with some very nice fixed base operators, which are in airports for small planes, and I got to sleep inside their lounge during the night instead of
Made
in the
coffee
tent.
for them when they came in the morning.
Yeah. But we've had little mishaps, you know. I mean, when you're bush flying and you're going around like that, occasionally you might crumple the end of a wing or hit a prop and it curls up and you have to fix it. And little things like this. We've used willow sticks to repair the airplane, put it back together to get back into
You're trying to get me
town
in
and
trouble.
home. No, you do what you have to do to get back to
Flew
home.
back to town with a piece of willow holding it together. That's no kidding.
But
And
that's
the prop, I had to take a big wrench and a hammer and everything else and straightened it. That's a no-no. But we had to get back to town, and the only way we get back was the plane because the ice wasn't all broken up yet. It was broken up enough to where you couldn't use a snow machine. So we flew back in. As soon as I got to where we were staying, I called and found a prop in Anchorage. Then I found one in the newspaper, so I canceled the one in Anchorage and got the one in Fairbanks that would fit our airplane. We never flew it again with the old prop. That old prop is in a restaurant down in Alabama.
when Dick was 22 years old, and I was 18,
Yeah.
and we sat down talking about things you'd like to do in life. And that sounds silly probably to you guys, but we were just sitting there, things you would like to accomplish. Today they call it making a bucket list. Back
Yeah.
then it was just things we thought we'd like to do in our lives. Well, we made a list on a piece of notebook paper because I was just finished, school and everything, and I still had my notebook and notebook paper. We made this list and we wrote down all these things that we would like to do, like build a house, live out in the wilderness, have a boat someday, learn to fly, build a log house in Alaska or a log cabin in Alaska. I mean, we had this long, long list. I came across that list about maybe 8 years ago, and we were floored. You know, you put things like that away and you forget about it. Well, when we were cleaning and getting ready to downsize and change things, I found that list and we went through and we crossed off everything on that list but one item. And that was go into space. We're too old now and our health isn't good enough to do that.
Guy offered to pay for the ticket.
Because now they have
Friend of
space
mine.
flights for individuals.
And I said, I can't do it now. Heck, they'd start that down, just light off the flare and I'd probably die.
One of the things was sail around the world that he
Yep.
mentioned.
Yeah.
And so he got hurt. We were building a 2-story log house, our retirement home upriver, because we'd lived in a small cabin and we just decided we wanted more room if we were going to be home 24/7 together every day. So we started building this 2-story log house in 1994 when he retired. And we were working on that, and he fell and got hurt pretty bad, busted up, and several surgeries later to put his bones back together. He said, if we're going to sail around the world, we better get busy and do it, because you know, this is not good. We're falling apart.